What's going on, guys? It's Fights MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about the top 10 fighters with the most pressure on them currently. These are the fighters that I think need to get a win in their next fight to kind of slow down everyone talking about them currently. I think that there's so many fighters in the UFC that have pressure, considering that you only fight 2 to 3 times a year. Every fight comes with pressure in it, but genuinely, I do think that there is some fighters, especially 10 that I'm going to do today, that have a little bit of more pressure in their next fights compared to the rest of them. I think that fighting inside the organization is a very hard thing, but these fighters have some little questions going on. Can they be the champions, or can they do this? Can they not get cut from the UFC? Considering that they've had bad performances, there's just questions going at hand. So I kind of want to talk about these top 10 fighters today with the most pressure under them. But prior to us jumping into the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That it's the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys are always and further notified about when UFC content releases every single day. Without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about the top 10 fighters with the most pressure right now. At number 10, I have Ian Machado Garry, and Ian Machado Garry is kind of this fighter who has been always thought to be a next future champion. He beat the likes of Neil Magny in dominant fashion. That propelled him into a Jeff Neal fight, which was kind of boring, got the fans a little bit off of his side. But I genuinely think the biggest thing that really distorted Ian Garry in his and put all this pressure on him is when he fought Michael Venom Page, and he had to shoot takedowns and whatnot and hold the ground, fights on the ground to win the fight in a very, very, very close fight. He said that he was going to go in there and piece Michael Venom Page up on the feet, do all this different type of stuff, which he wasn't able to do, which put a lot of different questions in his category, considering Ian Garry was thought to be one of, if not the best welterweight prospects in the UFC right now. And genuinely, I think that he has a lot of questions to answer to show if he is championship material. I know that Ian Garry is going to fight Joaquin Buckley at the UFC Tampa main event, last card of the year. 5-round main event, UFC Tampa. Great main event, like I said. But genuinely, I do think that that fight is going to allow Ian Garry to solve some of these pressure issues and allow him to show whether this is who he is, and if this fight with Joaquin Buckley is going to propel him into the top 5 of the welterweight division. Ultimately, Ian Garry is fighting with a lot of pressure under him right now. I think that there's a lot of haters and a lot of fans out there saying that Ian Garry isn't going to be able to be the next welterweight prospect or be able to go win the championship, and I think that's all in Ian Garry's hands, especially with this upcoming fight with Joaquin Buckley. The next fighter with the biggest pressure under them, in my opinion, is Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa has fought like 5 times in the past 5 years, which is crazy to me. He didn't fight at all in 2023. He fought once in 2020. He fought once in 2021. He fought once in 2022. And twice in 2024. And this is a very, very scary thing, in my opinion, considering that he is on a 2-loss streak and has lost 4 of his last 5 fights. And I understand the competition he has faced has been really, really good, losing to Israel Adesanya, Marvin Vettori, Robert Whittaker, Sean Strickland, really good fighters. But really, Paulo Costa's got to get a win under his belt to keep himself inside the organization. I truly don't know if this is going to be something that the UFC keeps him for a very long time. I know he's a fan favorite with the secret juice and all that, but Paulo Costa's got to get a win. Ultimately, that's the biggest thing inside the organization. No one will care if you're about how you are and whatnot if you're losing these fights. And genuinely, Paulo Costa is in a very dangerous situation where he has been losing fights consistently over the past 5 years. You cannot go 4-5 inside the organization, even though you are fighting elite level competition, and think that you're going to stay inside the UFC. Genuinely, Paulo Costa, in my opinion, has a lot of pressure under him, and that's why he is at number 9 on my list. At number 8, most pressure inside the UFC, I have Mr. Sergei Pavlovich. I think Sergei Pavlovich right now, coming off an interim title loss to Tom Aspinall after he was the number 2 contender, kind of thought of as the scariest person inside the UFC heavyweight division. And that was like, okay, Tom Aspinall, great fighter. Sergei Pavlovich, still really scary. And then he fought at UFC Saudi Arabia, where he got absolutely dismantled by Alexander Volkov in a fight that every single person thought Sergei Pavlovich was going to win. He's got more power. He's got kind of this. And it showed that in that fight with Volkov that Pavlovich is an incredibly one-dimensional fighter. And considering that, yes, I know he has so much power in his hands, and I know he's got this, and I know he's got that, considering that he was thought to be a future champion, but genuinely, Sergei Pavlovich, in my opinion, isn't as good as everyone has thought. And he's kind of at the point now to where he needs to start winning fights to ultimately get himself back in the title picture, because if he keeps losing, he's going to only throw himself farther and farther out of that. I know that he just scheduled a fight against Jairzinho Rozenstruik at UFC Saudi Arabia, I think again in February 1st of next year. I could be wrong with that date, but I know the fight between him and Rozenstruik is confirmed, and that's a big fight for Sergei Pavlovich, considering that Rozenstruik is a good fighter in the heavyweight division, but he's a little bit farther down in the rankings. Ultimately, Sergei Pavlovich needs to get a win under his belt. He's on a 2-fight losing streak inside the UFC. Yes, to great competition in Tom Aspinall and Alexander Volkov, but I think that there is a lot more questions with Sergei Pavlovich than answers right now. My number 7 biggest fighter with the most pressure under them is Mr. Leon Edwards. I think Leon Edwards is just he's a fighter who was on such a long win streak, and considering that he's kind of got this unfan-favorited style that was distorted with his Kamaru Usman knockout, I think he had a lot of the community on his side, considering that he was thought to be this knockout artist that is an absolute sniper and whatnot, but Leon Edwards' kind of persona was incredibly shifted and distorted after that second Usman fight, and I think it was kind of shown in that third Usman fight, the Colby fight, and especially the Bilal fight, of who he truly is as a fighter. Not saying that he's a bad fighter, but genuinely he is some fighter who needs to get a win under his belt to truly show the organization that he is a former champion, to show that Kamaru Usman knockout wasn't a fluke. And yes, I know he fought a Kamaru Usman over the hill. I know he fought Colby Covington, who hadn't fought in like 40 years. And once he got against real competition in Bilal Muhammad, he got absolutely pieced up. But Leon Edwards, like I said, is a very talented fighter. He's got a lot of promise under him. And genuinely, I think that he has got to remind everyone inside the organization of why he is one of the best welterweights. The only problem with that is the welterweight division right now, there's some really good fighters at the top. I don't know if Leon Edwards could beat Jack Della Maddalena. I think that's a more favorable matchup for him. But someone like Sean Brady, there's no way you can tell me that Leon Edwards beats him. I know, like, fighters like Shavkat Rakhmonov, I think I would favor Shavkat him. Leon has just got to go out there and show everyone why he is one of the best fighters inside the UFC, and genuinely that's only going to come with a lot of pressure if he does step into this next fight, and genuinely that's why I put Leon Edwards at number 7 on this list. At number 6 on my list, I have Mr. Mario Bautista, and Mario Bautista isn't like the name or caliber of these other fighters, but genuinely Mario Bautista, with, in my opinion, 2 out of his last 3 wins that were absolute robberies, is just crazy in my opinion. I know that he fought Jose Aldo at UFC 307 in Utah. Absolute awful decision, giving Mario Bautista the win. No way that you could tell me Mario Bautista won that fight. But a year prior, he fought Damon Blackshear at UFC 292 in a fight that 100% Blackshear won. I still am not happy about that decision, and that's kind of a random fight, but genuinely, if you have not seen that fight, Damon Blackshear versus Mario Bautista, absolute robbery in Bautista's opinion. He did get a good win over Ricky Simone in January, but I think the MMA community now is really against Mario Bautista, and I think that comes with a lot of pressure, considering that he's going to be thrusted into the top part of the bantamweight division. He could fight someone like Rob Font, who's a really good fighter, who just dismantled his teammate in Kyler Phillips. There's a lot of different things going on in that top part of the bantamweight division, to where you start getting into these higher level fighters, considering that that is one of the deepest divisions inside the UFC, that there's going to be some very hard fights for him. You look at the number like 6 or 7 ranked fighter being Henry Cejudo, who is in a world-class athlete, going above to see Chito Vera, going above to see fighters like Corey Sandhagen, Merab Dvalishvili, Umar Nurmagomedov. There's not a lot of fighters in there that I think Mario Bautista could beat. And I think that just puts a lot of pressure and amplifies it even more than it already was prior to him going in there and fighting. So genuinely, I think Mario Bautista right now is under some of the most pressure inside the organization, and that is why I put him slotted in here right at number 6 on my top 10 fighters with the most pressure on them right now. At number 5 on my list, I have Alexander Volkanovski, and Alexander Volkanovski is on a 2-fight loss streak and has lost 3 of his last 4, the only win coming at UFC 290 against Yair Rodriguez. A great win in my opinion. I thought Yair Rodriguez was going to be a very tough challenge for him, and he went in there and kind of just dismantled him very early, but there has been a lot of questions with Alexander Volkanovski's defense as of late. A big thing that we looked at in that Yair Rodriguez fight was that head kick, and that was something that Alexander Volkanovski was able to deter in a very different way, considering that Yair isn't that physically strong on the feet. The only issue is that once he fought a fighter who is physically strong on the feet like Islam Makhachev, he got that a little thing that we were talking about got exploited. That head kick was absolutely shown and put on display. And then he came back a little bit too early against Ilia Topuria, getting knocked out in that fight. And his next fight is either going to be against one of 2 killers, That being Ilia Topuria, the current champion, or being Diego Lopez, an incredible upcoming prospect inside the UFC featherweight division. Fights that I could 100% see Alexander Volkanovski losing. Right now, there is just so much of a kind of overbearing pressure on him to genuinely, these next fights are going to be super important for Volkanovski, being one of the greatest UFC featherweight fighters the organization has ever seen, and considering that he is getting kind of an immediate title rematch if he wants it against Topuria, I think also amplifies the pressure, considering that Topuria is the first person to not only to knock out Volkanovski, but to then go in there and knock out Max Holloway. And I think that just only makes it a little bit scarier for Topuria, or for Volkanovski, and raises the questions even more. Ultimately, Alexander Volkanovski at number 5 on this list, as I think, is completely valid. And I think that there is so much pressure going into Alexander Volkanovski's career, whether he fights Diego Lopez or Ilia Topuria in his next one. At number 4, fighters with the most pressure upon them currently, I have Merab Dvalishvili. I think Merab Dvalishvili got that win at UFC 306 at the Sphere. A great win, in my opinion. I think Merab Dvalishvili easily won that fight. But I think the reason that there's pressure behind him is kind of, I think the casual fan isn't a fan of him. I understand that Merab is on this long win streak and kind of all this stuff, but considering that you have the community not behind you, it kind of makes you want to fight in a little bit of a different way. And when you kind of do that and get rid of everything that you've done, I think it's a very, very, very hard thing for you to stay composed and to stay in yourself and to truly go out there and win fights. I think Merab Dvalishvili, in order to keep his belt, has to fight in his way. And I think that without the community there, and kind of with a lot of these other fighters who have bigger names like Sean O'Malley and Umar Nurmagomedov, I think it's going to be very hard and very kind of overbearing to fight these guys, considering that the UFC is going to want those two individuals to be champion over him. I think that this is a very, very, very interesting time for Merab. I think that he's kind of got the belt. He 100% deserves it, but he's going to probably rematch Sean O'Malley next, because Sean O'Malley's such a big star, and even though he doesn't deserve the rematch, that name alone is going to grant him one, and then he's probably going to have to fight Umar Nurmagomedov right then after. Genuinely, Merab Dvalishvili is in a position to where there is so much overbearing pressure on him, considering that the UFC doesn't want him as champion and wants someone else with a bigger name, whether that's Sean O'Malley for his self-created name and that kind of persona and style that he has, or Umar Nurmagomedov being the cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov, the greatest lightweight of all time. At number 3, fighter with the most pressure under them currently, I have Mr. Kamaru, the Nigerian Nightmare Usman. And I think Kamaru Usman right now could get thrusted into this position with Shavkat Rakhmonov at UFC 310. I think that is probably a very likely thing, but say he loses that fight or whatnot. He is already on a 3-fight losing streak, losing to Leon Edwards at UFC 278, and one of the most impressive knockouts in my opinion. But then he went back in there and fought Leon Edwards in the United Kingdom, in England, and genuinely got pieced up in that fight, in a very close fight. But I think that was kind of Kamaru Usman returning a little bit too early. He fought Khamzat Chimaev and lost that fight. Now, that was a very impressive performance, considering that of what Khamzat Chimaev just did to Robert Whittaker, an established middleweight, and Kamaru Usman took that fight on 10 days' notice. I truly do think, though, that Kamaru Usman needs to get a win in his next one, whether this fight is with Shavkat Rakhmonov, whether this fight is with Jack Della Maddalena, whether this fight is with Sean Brady. Kamaru Usman has to go in there and get a win. He is one of the most prominent figures at the top of the welterweight division, and he has been for a very long time. But Kamaru needs to understand that he is kind of on a little bit of a skid. I understand that the quality of opponents has been very high, considering that he stepped in on 10 days' notice to fight Khamzat. He also fought Leon Edwards twice, who was the former champion. I think that Kamaru Usman getting a win and kind of reestablishing himself and settling in the welterweight division is going to be a very big thing. But that is going to be a very hard task, especially if he takes this fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov, which is kind of on like 4 weeks' notice. It would be a very, very, very interesting thing at hand. I do think that Kamaru Usman is one of the best welterweights of all time. In my opinion, the second greatest welterweight behind Georges St. Pierre. But it's a fight that I do think that Kamaru Usman, and a kind of challenge that Kamaru Usman is going to have to overcome with this so much pressure on him currently. At number 2, fighter with the most pressure under them currently, in my opinion, is Colby Covington. Colby Covington is on kind of a losing streak. He's on a 1-fight losing streak, but prior to then, he lost to Kamaru Usman as well, and kind of hasn't proved himself again inside the UFC organization. Now, a big question with Colby is how bad does he want to be in the organization? Because I know he's kind of taken up poker, he's kind of done his own thing, but he's also said that he wants to fight the likes of like Garry and all these different types of individuals inside the organization. We got fighters calling him out. Garry called him out, Sean Brady called him out, but Colby doesn't want to take these fights at Oh, and I truly do think that is going to be a very, very, very big thing, because these are some fights that not only would help him win and get his name back under himself, and I think fighting two younger stars like Ian Garry or Sean Brady, who do have their own name, is going to be something that is incredible for Colby Covington to do. But the big question is, is he gonna have the hunger in order to do so? And genuinely, I don't know if that's going to be the case. Colby Covington is a fighter who, yes, has kind of lost skill over time. I know in that Leon Edwards fight in 2023, he apparently broke his foot in the first one. I don't know what the validity to that is, but genuinely, I do think that Colby Covington has got to get a win if he wants to stay in the UFC. His only win over his last two fights, or his last three fights, is Jorge Masvidal, and that was a Masvidal who was at the very end of his career, and he lost to Kamaru Usman in a very close fight, and he got absolutely blitzed by Leon Edwards in a very, very, very one-sided fight. And genuinely, I think Colby Covington, especially considering that a lot of the community either loves him or hates him, has so much pressure going into his next fight inside the UFC, if that ever happens. The number one fighter with the most pressure inside the UFC right now is Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley has so much pressure under him, considering that he just lost the UFC bantamweight title. Sean O'Malley was one of these fighters who we all thought would reign for a kind of a long time, considering that he has that kind of very good striking style with good takedown defense behind it. And genuinely, I do think that Sean O'Malley is a very, very, very good fighter. But Sean O'Malley got absolutely exposed by Merab Dvalishvili, and I think it helps him a little bit that the UFC wants him to be champion, considering that he's got that persona, he's got that vibrant personality and whatnot, but that also only amplifies the pressure even more. And I do think that Sean O'Malley is at a stage of his career to where this win, or probably with this rematch with Merab Dvalishvili, is going to be a massive fight for him. He could 100% win the rematch, but considering the domination that happened in the first fight, I think that he's got to patch up a lot of holes, and I think that first fight created so much of a perception upon him that genuinely he's got so many questions to solve, mainly with his takedown defense. Merab looked like he was doing anything he wanted with him in that fight. He started kissing him on the back of his head, which was so embarrassing for Sean O'Malley, and genuinely was a fight that Sean says that he won, but I think it's just a coping mechanism for Sean O'Malley to kind of get over that loss in such embarrassing fashion on one of the biggest pay-per-views the UFC has ever seen. Like I said, Sean O'Malley has the pressure from the fans wanting him to be champion, and the UFC wanting him to be champion, not only because of his charismatic self, but also his very fan-friendly style, and is genuinely a fighter who has so much pressure on him currently, because the bantamweight division also is incredibly stacked with fighters like Umar Nurmagomedov, Corey Sandhagen, Peter Yan, Davidson Figueiredo, so many guys who could become champion very, very soon if they were given the opportunity, and a lot of guys that I do not think Sean O'Malley could beat. I know he already beat Peter Yan, but that was a very close fight, and a rematch would look very interesting. A fight with Davidson Figueiredo would look very interesting. A fight with Corey Sandhagen would look very interesting, and Sean O'Malley has kind of put himself in a very much big bloodbath situation at the top of that bantamweight division. I do think that Sean O'Malley is one of the best fighters in the bantamweight division, but I think that there is so many questions with his game right now, with his takedown defense and how these guys who have grappling could expose him in that category. I genuinely think Sean O'Malley is at a very big point in his career where he has so much pressure under him. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. But while you're down there, please think about what this take is today, the top 10 fighters with the most pressure under them currently. I think that there is so many fighters within the organization who have pressure on them, and these, to make the top 10 in this list was very hard, but all these fighters, I think, have so much pressure going into each and next ones of their fight for different reasons and different opinions. If you look at someone like Ian Garry, he has questions under him, especially with this fight against Michael Venom Page, kind of like Sean O'Malley. But like Kamaru Usman and Paulo Costa, they just need to get a win under their belt to keep themselves relevant inside their respective division. Ultimately, I think the UFC is kind of a place where the only thing that matters are wins, no matter the personality or no matter what else. I think that if you get wins, it kind of hides and kind of writes off a lot of different questions currently inside the organization. And genuinely, I think right now, all these fighters respectively have to go in there and get a win in their category. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys are always and fully notified about future UFC content releasing every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.